And just like last week, I forgot to start recording at the beginning, but luckily, nobody whose images we've looked at was not here. So you won't really have missed anything. I think there's one or two that we'll look at here in the second half that are not here. So they can watch that on the recording later. All right, so a couple people still out, but we're going to go ahead and roll and um, they can catch up. So let's get back into Bridge. All right. Ashton, you're up here. All right. So we have, so you have, I'm guessing that the ones that are titled with the word new are the processed ones, the finished ones, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So unless there's a significant, well, there is on a couple of them. We'll look primarily at the finished one, but this is, yeah, okay. So I can see the detail that's been brought back in. Color balance has been cooled down a little bit, but it still looks pretty normal, pretty natural. So this is, and your images came in very small. This one at least came in very small. That one didn't.
I still have that black dot in my all my pictures, and it's not my lens because I don't see anything on the lens, and I tried to clean out the like when you open the lens
The
and stuff.
sensor. Mhm.
Yeah, but I still think there's stuff on it.
Did you lock the mirror up to do that like they did in
Yeah.
the video?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's possible that sometimes you get dust in there that is not uh, even a little bit of air isn't going to
Yeah.
get rid of it, and you have to go a little further with the anti-static brush like they showed in the video as well. But also keep in mind that you can try that air technique more than once, and these cameras have anti-dust software in the camera. Like every time you turn it on and shut it off, typically it does a dust removal, and eventually it may work its way out. But if it doesn't, you may end up having to go in and either do it yourself with a brush or take it somewhere and have them clean it out. But you can test it. Yeah, do the testing thing for sure. Like shoot a white card or out a white window or something like that, and just see if if you're seeing any spots that are showing up. You'll definitely see them if they're there. If you do something like that, the nice thing is that a lot of images don't show them anyway.
Yeah.
It's just the ones that have a lot of brightness to them that are typically going to show it. So anyway, yeah, window is probably the most standard type of a frame that you can use, a window or a door. So I want to show you a little thing here. So I can see that you from your original, you did rotate a little bit to try to straighten that window up, but
Yeah.
because of the angle that you shot out of it, you weren't able to get it perfectly. But there is a way. I'm going to open this, even though it's the smaller file in Photoshop, and I'll just show you real quickly here. All right, so if I take this image and I have to go into, so if I'm looking at my layers palette right now, I've only got the background layer. There's no other layers here. And you see this little lock icon, which means that there are a lot of things that I can't do to a background or a locked layer. So all I have to do is click that and unlock it. And now I have available to me a lot of things that I couldn't do before. So I'm going to hit Command T, and on Windows it'll be Control T to go into Free Transform. And then if I hold down, it's the Command key on Mac and the Control key on Windows, and just grab that corner while I'm holding it down, I can actually pull that up and straighten that. And then beyond that, because there's a little bit of bowing in the window, if I right click inside that frame, I can select one that says warp and just kind of pull those frames, or that frame rather, back into place to kind of line it up a little bit. maybe a little bit on the bottom here as well. Get this bottom, there we go. So there's some, there's some controls in Photoshop that allow you to go in, and you have to recrop this a little bit to get rid of the white space at the top and bottom. But let me just go back and forth. So that was where we started, and just a couple of movements with the mouse straightens things up. So anytime you have something that's a little bit off and you want to change that, that's probably the easiest way to do it, especially if it's not off by all that much, which that wasn't. Just wanted to show that to you guys. All right, then we have perspective. So wow, that was your original, and you do definitely have a dust spot. That's what that is in the upper right-hand corner there. But yeah, a lot of, so you have an overexposed image for sure, but and actually the processing, you might have gone a little too far under, because now it looks a little bit gray and drab, but this one was definitely over. It definitely needed to come down. I think this one's interesting. I like the fact that there's a light off of this pole. It kind of gives it a, if it was just the wiring up there, I don't think it would have as much impact. And plus the fact that they come at, the wires and the light fixture come at right angles to each other, which creates, again, a lot of diagonals in this image as well. And so for point of view, we started here. I think a lot of you have the same tree. And again, I like what you did with the how you compose this and bringing that tree from the corner and giving it all that room to breathe, coming in from the left. So you could say, well, maybe you should flip this, because again, we read right to left or left to right, but actually the branches, the tree itself is our subject, and the branches that are on the left kind of lead us to that tree. So we are reading left to right to get over to that. So good job on composition on that. So there's your dust spot. It's a big dust bunny. That's not your normal dust spot. That's a big one. And then your simplicity. So again, yeah, take something that doesn't belong, something that contrasts with color, brightness, or whatever, put it out in an area that's very much the same behind, and you have simplicity. I think maybe might have moved that just a little bit more to get it on that intersection. Either put it dead center or put it on the intersection of the thirds. It's kind of in between the two right now, but as far as simplicity goes, yeah, you got it. And then symmetry, I think even though we don't have to be perfectly symmetrical, I probably would have cropped it in just a little bit to get rid of that window in the bottom right. And then it would have had a much more symmetrical look to it. It's got a little bit of a distorted look too, probably because it's a wider lens that you shot this with. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes to blow that distortion out is kind of creative and cool. So, and then your use of diagonals. So I like the thought process of using, again, we've got leading lines, we've got diagonals, we've got a couple of things going on here. The fact that your fence is not only in focus, but where the focus is, like it's a little bit out of focus where it starts, it comes into focus about here. And even though the background is a little busy, it's out of focus enough to keep that from being too much of an issue. So even though we don't have a before on that, I kind of like that. I like your tree. I think your tree, and I like your symmetry. I probably would have, like I said, just brought that in a little bit more. Which one do you think you like the best?
I like the tree better.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot going for it, especially given where the original was, what you started with. All right, Eva's up next. So a couple interesting things here. So your diagonal image, which has more than one diagonal in it, right? So we've got the cannon, but we've also got the railings that are at an opposite angle in the lower left, which is kind of cool. whoops, sorry, went the wrong way. Bringing some detail back, which didn't probably look possible. The front of that stone that it's on looks like it's completely blown out, but there is actually detail there that you were able to bring back in. So yeah, when you play diagonals against each other, that's even more powerful than just having a diagonal. So I like that. I like that you did that. Framing using, so using the foreground element as almost a, it's completely dark for the most part, except you can see the window ledge here at the bottom, which lets us know that it's not just a black square that you placed over the image. It does tell us that you're looking through something. And the processing again was done pretty well here. Definitely brought some color and some detail back into the background. So your viewpoint image, I like this a lot. I like your, you lost a little bit of highlights in the finished one, but yeah, I think overall the exposure was probably a little better here, and the color is a little bit better here. But this is a great spot. I'm up there a lot, and I love those flowers on that thing down below. That's just, that walkway as you go through there is so cool to shoot. But this is an interesting vantage point. This is up, there's that little, I think there's a little table there, unless you might have been down a little further. I don't think you're right where where the fountain goes over and the steps go down. I think this is a little further to the left of that, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. But anyways, a great spot for that. So I like this. This is your original, and wow, what a
I know, what a
change.
difference.
Yeah, that water just, I like the fact that you cropped out. Yeah, cropped out the extra boat in the back that we didn't need.
Right.
And then we've got the color going, we've got yellows and greens, but we've got them in the background and then in the foreground as well. So, and the fact that this is a little bit wider angle, I think, than, it's not like a telephoto or anything. It makes the bow of that boat a little more prominent. So I like what happened there. Original perspective, and then I think for me, I think the color you might have gone a little far with the color saturation on this one, because it's starting to bleed. The colors are starting to bleed a little bit. Overall, it's a better look. It's a little dark and it's a little oversaturated. Again, that's just a personal preference.
I was thinking, oh, this looks like Ireland.
Yeah, the greenery definitely.
I mean, it wasn't, but
the green parts definitely. You could also, this is also a leading line image. It's also, this has a lot of compositional elements going for it. So as I told somebody earlier, being a little timid sometimes, you went a little bit the other way. And it's really, it's a personal preference thing. So there's no right or wrong. If you like it, you like it, and it's okay the way it is. For me, I'm just saying I probably would have pulled back, maybe raise the exposure a little bit and pull back a little bit on the saturation. I think it still would have been way, way better than what that was. And then our last one is symmetry. So again, not perfectly symmetrical because the flowers in the foreground aren't perfectly symmetrical, but there's enough of the background that is. And even, I like the fact that doors, yeah, it is a door.
I said it.
It's a little ajar,
little
like
filter.
Everything in this image is a little cattywampus, which, is not what you normally see in a symmetrical image, but it still kind of works. I think I actually see you in the image too, in the reflection of the door.
Oh yeah. I didn't notice that. Yeah, that's me.
Looks like I can see your arms holding the camera up. So again, I like a couple of these. I think one of them is definitely stronger than the others, though. What do you think?
The boat?
The boat. Yeah, I love the boat.
I like the boat.
That one really came out well. All right. Alana is up next.
Thank you.
All right. So we have our diagonals. This is our original and then the edited version. Again, I'm seeing on your images something similar in that I think they're probably a little darker than they should be. And in this case, it's fine if it's a the fact that it's almost a silhouette. You're like, well, it should be dark, right? It should. Like the blacks should be very black, but the overall tone, and not only of this image but a couple of the other ones, is a little bit on the dingy side. So you might want to take a look at whatever it is you're editing on, just to make sure that you can get that you're looking at the right values. But
Yeah.
I like the shot. I like, again, the fact that we've got, again, you could call this a couple of different things, not just diagonals, but you've got diagonals coming from all different directions. And it makes a very strong image when you do that. So I like that part of it for sure. Then we've got our framing. So again, for me, I love the fact that we've got all this detail in that image, but there's such a cyan cast to it, and it's so a little dark overall that I think that I'm guessing that you probably, like, if you were seeing it on my screen, you would probably say, "Ooh, that's not what I intended." But from there to get to there is still pretty good. Again, I love the fact that you guys are figuring out how much detail there actually is in some of these images and what's capable of being brought back. So perspective on this one, and again, I like the fact that we've gotten rid of the color, and it makes it look like that tree's growing out of the barrel. This is really juxtaposition is what I would call this. It's one of the elements that we only briefly talked about. We're going to talk about it later in the semester. But you can definitely say, perspective as well, because you've put your foreground and your background subject in an area that makes it look something other than what it actually is.
Yeah.
And now I'll talk about a sign of the times. Simplicity. And hopefully this is not your mask.
It was my mom's. I picked it up, but like I just stepped on it. It's already been used, so
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like it's been very used. We'll just leave it at that. But for a very simple image, I love two things. I love the composition, and I love the fact that you shot this at a time of day where we're creating shadows, not just from that mask, but on all those little cobblestones. I mean, that really brings that texture out well. Your original image, even in that one it does, but the whites are definitely better here. Still, I think it's just a shade under where it should be, but pretty good. I like the composition. I like the lighting that you used on that. So our symmetry original and our finished one, again, love the processing, love the warm tones, the fact that it's almost has a color graded look to it, which is something that's used in film a lot. Good job on the cropping, eliminating all the stuff that didn't need to be there, that we didn't need to see, that didn't add anything to the image. So good example of that for sure. And then viewpoint, I honestly thought this was bigger. I've on TV, it looks so big.
That's not actually in New York, but
Yeah, I did know that. The base gave it away.
yeah.
And the same thing, it's not just a density thing. Some of your images are getting a really heavy cyan cast, and I maybe that was intentional, I don't know, but it's definitely a lot more than what the original is. And the whole thing is a little bit under, it has a look of being underexposed. But again, the lighting is done. It was done at a good time here. The statue's lit, at an oblique angle, so it's causing some dimensionality across the front of it. And again, for viewpoint, good job with that. I mean, as far as the illustration, I definitely think that two of these images are stronger than the others, but I'll let you decide what you think.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, even though it's kind of odd, I like your mask, but I also really like the symmetrical one. I think what you did with that overall, in not just in the processing, but the cropping and everything, and then recognizing what it was. I think that's a really powerful, really strong one. But either one of those.
I like the symmetry one.
All right, that's what we got. Somebody trying to get in. Yes, Haley's trying to get in. And Jacob, I'm just seeing your message, and yes, that's fine. Just go ahead and upload whenever. All right, so let's go back. We got a couple more. Bridge. So David's not here. We're going to take a look at his real quickly here. I think he's got, oh, okay, I see what he's got. So again, I've got, I don't know why this is happening, but I've got this tiny little original. His finished one is okay. And I know they're not like that. At least I don't think they are. The originals are not like that. But anyway, as long as we can see what we've got. So this is his diagonals image using the parking lines in the parking lot. A little bit of noise I'd like to have seen, and I can't tell from the original if it's in the original, but I'd like to have seen a little noise dropped out of that. But again, I think based on some of the stuff I've seen from him, I don't know if that's just a style that he likes. It is very high ISO. It's 16,000 is his ISO. So that's really, really high. And it has f-stop. So David, if you watch this, so the reason that you had to take the ISO so high, your shutter speed's only a 1/15 of a second, but your f-stop is f20, which is really going to, if you had knocked that back to like f5, 6 or something like that, your shutter speed would have been much faster. Your ISO could have been dropped down to get rid of the noise. So still a little bit of an issue there figuring out that exposure triangle, I think. All right, so this is his framing. That's the original. That's the finished version. So basically the background tree being framed by the foreground trees. So I can see the cropping was done to enhance that a little bit. Looks like he hit Ogilby at dusk. That's what a lot of these images look like. So that's his original file for perspective, and then the crop finished one. So again, just looking at something a little differently than normal, looking at it as a reflection in a window. So it's a good idea. It's kind of a similar thing on his, so this is viewpoint, but it could also be framing in looking through the steering wheel at the dashboard on the car. For whatever reason, his simplicity one is the one that I really like. So that's a color version, and that's a black and white. I'm really torn here, but I think there's just something really moody about the black and white. The only thing I would have changed would have been to crop a little bit off, tiny little bit off the top, but a lot off of the bottom, because that's also black. That lower third of the image is just completely black. But even still, I think I like that black and white, even though we see detail in it there. I think it's just very moody and very strong. And since he's not here, I get to pick. So that's the one I'm going with, is his black and white tree. And I don't believe Kashmir's here either this week. So, so her diagonal is use of the a couple of the fence lines. Again, the processing definitely brings the color balance back in play, brings the detail back in play, and framing kind of the same thing, using the fence, the white fence to frame the flowers in the background. Not really anything negative I can say. I might have cropped it even a little bit more along the top just to get rid of the top of that bar, and so that we would have had nothing above that, but it's pretty close. So perspective, a lot of you found this same little little thing out in front of the building there. I definitely think I would have cropped this. And I think I might have even changed my angle a little bit so that I could have, since the words are in there, I think I might have stepped to the side a little bit to show the words. Maybe keep that light pole at the left edge of the image, and then be able to read the words down below. That's just me. Simplicity, again, like a lot of them. And again, putting an image like this dead center and leaving a lot of space around it for simplicity is not a bad idea. Some of you went ahead and moved that to the intersection of thirds. That's fine too. But the dead center on an image like this is not a problem. So this is symmetry. I think I like the original better than the edited one here a little bit. It's a little, again, I think we're having some calibration issues on some of your screens because this is a little blue and a little dark. And I think for symmetry, it's really, really close, but I think the angle is off just a little bit. Like if you look at the railing going up, if this were done for symmetry, I think I would have shot this so that I couldn't have seen both the front and the back supports on that railing. If they had lined up, then I think the building might have been a little more symmetrical, but it's a good subject for that. And then viewpoint, this might be the best one in here. Convergence, leading lines, viewpoint, it's got a lot of things going for it. This would have been a good one to have, I don't know, bunny rabbit at the end of that bridge. Something, you know, a subject that it's leading us to, person, whatever. But even still, it's strong enough even without. I think that's probably the best image out of those. So we're going to put that in. And we should have 9, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Correct. All right. Now I got to move this window around so that I can see all of you. All right. So a couple of you don't, I was going to say, a couple of you didn't have your cameras on. I'll need to see the hands here for just a minute, and then we can go back. And I haven't seen Jamie's face at all. I see his icon there, but he's not. I haven't seen him here.
Yeah, my computer got, I think, a virus because in my previous Zoom, I couldn't get like the camera to work either.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your computer has COVID. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, no problem. So you'll just have to do it verbally when we get to the image that you want to vote for. You just say, you know, whatever, just say something and I'll know it was you. So we're going to start with the framing image at the top left, and we'll get a show of hands. Who likes that one? 1. All right, the simplicity flower. Okay, the tree. The black and white simplicity. Okay, got 1 there. 1.5. The boat. Okay, the leaf.
That's my vote was for the boat.
For the boat? Okay, no problem. Leaf. Bridge. Viewpoint tree. And viewpoint footbridge. Okay, so the winner is the boat.
Yeah.
So let me make a note of that before I go on. I'm going to try to do it quickly here. Again, this laptop's really acting up and it's taking 4 times longer to do everything. There we go. So I'm going to throw another point out here as well. Chris, I'm going to give you one as well. Not just because this image is great, but because your whole submission was just off the charts. So you get one there as well. Oh, and that keeps the two of you are actually tied right now. There's a few people with 2 points, a few with 1, but you guys both are at 3 right now. So good job. There's still a couple of other images. I like all of these again. There's a couple that were really close, but those two I think were the standouts. So that's where we're going with that. All right. So I had a couple different directions I could have gone here, but I think what we're going to do is I want to look at the next subject we're going to tackle is going to be a little bit complex. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing my chat window now. Okay, to the Dropbox. I'll check that, Jacob, no problem. We're gonna go into an area that we really only touched very, very briefly on, which is strange because in my opinion, it's the most important aspect, the most important element in any photograph. We've talked about, composition, we've talked about white balance, we talked about exposure, but we haven't really talked too much about this. And like I said, to me, it is the most important element in a photograph. Anybody want to guess what it is?
Color?
Color is something we are going to talk about coming down the road, but there's something even more important than that. You can't even take a photograph without it.
Subject?
Well, true, you need a subject, but it's not where I was going. What does, yeah, that's it, lighting. The word photography literally means, it's from 2 Greek words meaning drawing with light. So you can't take pictures without light, but the thing with lighting is that you have to use lighting. You have to use all the tools at your disposal, but lighting in particular is what you use to simulate 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional medium. You're looking at a screen, you're looking at a photograph, it's all 2-dimensional. Lighting is what you use to create shadows, because shadows tell our brain that there's something raised there, that there's some dimension or some form to it. If you don't have, if the lighting is what we consider flat, for example, the lighting on my face right now is very flat. It's coming from a light that's over top of the monitor. And just, there we go. I was gonna say we just went dark for a second. It's not, it's even, so it works for something like this, but it's not the most dramatic lighting. It's not it doesn't really give us a lot of form and dimension. You can see the shadows underneath the guitars in the back on the back wall. That gives us some idea of the shape of those things. And the reason it does is because it's not directly at them. It's coming from overhead. So we're going to look at some basic ideals of lighting, and we're going to we'll look at things other than portrait, but primarily we're going to do portrait lighting, and there's a reason for that, but we will look at a couple of other things as well. So let me pull this up, and I'm going to try to do this. Last time we did this, we had some issues. I had some issues when I was in play mode of not being able to see certain things on the screen. So we're going to try to do it this way. All right. Let me share that screen. All right, if I go to play, oh, I still can see you. I just don't have a cursor. So maybe that'll be okay. Maybe we can make this work. Okay, so I got to move your window, doggone it. All right, maybe that'll work now. All right, so basic lighting. So when we talk about light quality, there's intensity and there's quality. Intensity is just what gives us a proper exposure, but quality is what gives us that form and dimension. And when we talk about it, typically we're talking about the size of a light source and the direction that the light is coming from. So the one basic rule to learn right off the bat is that the larger a light source is in relationship to the subject, the softer the light is. I'll give you well, I'll try to verbally give you an example. Here's a, so this is a reflector off of one of my lights. And if I take that across the room, if I put it all the way over in the corner, the size of this light in relationship to me is actually very small, okay? And so it's going to create some harsh light. It's going to create some very strong shadows. If I put some kind of a modifier on this to effectively increase the size of it, if I put, bounce it into an umbrella or shoot it through a softbox or even put some diffusion material between it and me, and I effectively increase the size of that light source, what I've done is just soften the light. I've also decreased the output, but that's a separate matter altogether. As far as quality of light, it's all about the size of the light source in relationship to the subject. This is a really important line. It's something that I want you guys to remember. It's going to come up again. It's going to be on the test at the end of the semester. That the larger the source in relationship to the subject. Now that's the key, in relationship to the subject. So when you think about lights that create hard shadows and lights that create soft shadows, what light source can you think of that probably creates the harshest light shadows there are? Is there anything you can think of that creates really, really strong shadows?
Like flashlights or fluorescent lights.
Flashlights would definitely, because of their size, if they were intense enough. But there's one light source that probably creates the strongest shadows of anything else.
The sun?
The sun. Yeah, here comes the sun. So now here's what's interesting. The sun is huge, right? It is millions of times larger than we are. Why does it create hard shadows instead of soft ones? That's a question. Anybody answer that? Why is the biggest light source we know creating the hardest shadows? The clue's right there on the screen.
Is it because it's super, super bright?
It's not that it's bright.
Oh, okay.
Further
Right.
away.
Who said, what was that, you, Eva?
Yeah, it's further away.
Yeah, it's 93 million miles away. So its size in relationship to the subject, which is us, is relatively small. It's actually, if you go outside and look, the sun doesn't look any bigger than this reflector, okay? 93 million miles away. Takes like 9 minutes for the light to even get here. So the key here is that it's not about just the size of the light. It's the size of the light in relationship to the subject. So if you have a light source that is, say, this big, let's say it's 18 inches, 2 feet, or whatever in diameter, the softness of that light is going to change as you move it closer to or further away from your subject. Is it's really close and up to your subject, of course, you have to adjust the intensity when you do this. But if it's very close to your subject, if I got a 2-foot light source right here on me, it's going to create very soft shadows on my face. If I take that same 2-foot light source and move it into the next room, now it's a much smaller light source and I'm actually going to see more defined shadows on my face. Haven't changed the light source at all. All I've done is change its distance. So that's critical to remember that. Light direction is the second most important thing. It must create shadows in order to show 3 dimensions. Now, it doesn't mean that shadowless light is bad. It does have its place. It does have its uses. But if you're trying to show dimensionality, if you're trying to show mood, if you're trying to show, in most cases, a lot of creativity, you typically are going to want that direction of light to be other than directly on. Okay, so if I've got a light source like this light bulb in front of me that's lighting my face right now, it's directly onto me. If I want to create better light on myself, I could take that light source and move it over here, and it's going to create some shadows. Not necessarily better light because it's a small source, but at least I'll see dimension, I'll see shadows, and I'll know where the light source is, and I'll know what the shape of my face is based on those shadows. There was something else I wanted to say there, and I forgot it, so hopefully it'll come back to me. Now, this is something we're not going to get into right now, the inverse square law. I'm only going to show it to you and mention it to you so that you understand the general principle as far as how it works. It says light fall off is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. That kind of sounds like something the Scarecrow would say in The Wizard of Oz. Like it, it sounds really smart, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All you need to know, all that says is that light falls off very quickly. Let me show you the graphic here. So if we have our light source, and you can see that, assume that these numbers along the bottom are feet, the number of feet a subject is away from the light source. At 1 foot, you're receiving 1 unit of light, okay? If we're gonna say that is 1 unit of light at 1 foot, when you move to 2 feet, you'd think that you'd be getting half the light, but you're not. You're only getting 1/4 of the light because of that inverse square law. You move to 4 feet, you think, okay, now I'm going to be at 1/8. No, you're at a 16th. It falls off that fast. So in the real world, here's how it works. Let's say you're photographing a person and you've got a flash on your camera, and that person is standing directly against a wall. The wall is basically going to receive the same amount of light that the person does, so it's going to record normally. What happens when you move that person, if this is your, get my hand right, if this is your wall and your subject was right here, what happens if you move the person out here and then your camera's out here and you take the picture? What happens to the wall when you do that, as far as lighting is concerned? Anybody? Think about how those two pictures would look with the person right up against the wall, and then let's say 8 feet in front of the wall. Is the wall going to be as bright in that picture as it was in the first one?
Would the background basically be like black because all the flash is going on the person?
Yes, and it's because of the way this light falls off. It's because of how fast it falls off. So the further you move that person away from the background, the less light the background is actually going to receive. And it falls off so quickly that you can actually photograph with a white background and make it look black if you light with a very harsh light that's close to the subject, because of that light fall off. There's just not enough of it that's going to reach the background to make a difference. And it's that 3-point, we talked about that 3-point thing all, a couple of times. You've got your background, you've got your subject, and you've got your camera. And as the distance between the background and the subject, now we're talking about if you were using artificial light. If you're outside under a cloudy sky, it's not going to make a difference. I don't care how far you move that person away from the background's going to look the same because everything is evenly illuminated from one location. What I'm talking about is using either an on-camera flash or some type of supplemental lighting off camera. That's when all of this comes into play. So let's look at some examples. So direction and quality. So if you look at this image, there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 lights on this being used on this image. Now, we don't really want to see the effect of 6 lights because if you did, that would create a lot of really complex shadows. But we don't have a shadow problem on here. But can anybody tell me where the main source of light is? Like the one that's creating the overall illumination, the form and dimension on this image. Where is that in relationship to the subject and the camera? There's a couple of clues in here.
Definitely on the right.
Like as you're looking at the image, you're right.
My right.
Yeah. So camera right, subject left. Yeah, you're correct. And so why do you say that? What makes you say that?
He's got more shadows on the left.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really big clue that when you're doing portraits of people, you can see. Look at his eyes. You can actually see the reflection of that light source in his eyes. So here's where the 6 lights are. There's a very large, it's 4 feet by 6 feet, light source off to his left, my right, that's illuminating the overall face. There is a large light source at the camera position at a much lower power level that's giving overall illumination and keeping the shadows from being too harsh. Do you see this light along his right cheek, the left side of the image, how that's much brighter there? So that's called a kicker light, and it's in the back corner. And the reason it's there is that because his face is rounded, as the light from that main light goes further and further, as his face goes further and further around, that is going to go more and more into shadow. So that's there to keep his face and his hair and his shoulders and everything from blending into the background. So there's one on both sides. There's that one that you can really see on his cheek. But if you look at his left cheek on the right side, if you look closely, you'll actually see there's another one at a little less intensity on that side, lighting up that side. And it's not so much there for his face, but if you look at his jacket on his left shoulder, right side of the image, you can see that that black jacket's not bleeding into the background, and it's because of that light. And then finally, there's a light over top, which isn't really playing into this because of the way it's cropped, but it's to light his hair and the top part of his shoulders. So good lighting is designed to show 3 dimensions, like we said, in a 2-dimensional medium. And the other thing is that we are typically, if I'm working in the studio or if I'm doing anything with artificial light, we're trying to simulate the same thing we get with outdoor light. And yes, you can get multiple out, you can, in normal illumination, normal lighting, you can get the appearance of multiple light sources. So, but we only want it to look like there's one dominant light source. All right, so we said earlier, soft light produces softer shadows. This is that same 4x6 foot softbox with a kicker, with overhead lights, with a little bit of a fill light from the camera position. And then harder light produces harsher shadows. And by harder, we just simply mean it's a smaller light source in relationship to the subject. So this is a bare bulb on him. So the light source is probably only about that big, and it's not all that close to him. That's what's creating that hard shadow underneath his chin on his neck. And then there are other lights in the background to illuminate the edges and the rim of him. But in general, just remember that a larger light source will produce softer shadows and a smaller light source will produce harsher shadows. So here's the same kind of an idea, same kind of lighting setup. These are all relatively soft lighting sources. The kid with the violin on the right, the light source he's looking directly at it. It's completely across from him. And even though there's a fill light at the camera position, it's turned down because I don't want the side of his face that's facing the camera to be as bright as the front of his face. I want to be able to see that there's roundness to his face. So that's the reason why you see a little bit more shadow there. Outdoor lighting is a little more difficult because it's subtle, but it's always there. So even though, you know, there's not as much direction, say on a cloudy day, it's always there if you really look for it. So the image on the left, it's diffused light, but she's placed in between those 2 columns because the sky that's out to her left is very bright in relationship to where she's standing. So that's where our light source is coming. It doesn't necessarily have to be the sun, but anything. It could be the sun hitting a white wall and bouncing back. That could be the main light source in an image. In this case, it's the sky. Same kind of thing there. Same thing here. None of these use any supplemental lighting. None of them have a flash at all. They may have a reflector just to bounce a little light in the eyes. But you can see both of these images, the light is coming from the left side. That's where the sun is. One of them, the one on the left, the sun's out and it's creating a little bit harsher light. The one on the right, there's a little bit of cloud cover, just a little bit. So the light isn't quite as hard. You can shoot in direct sunlight as long as you have enough fill light to not let those shadows go so bad. What here, I mean, I might have a reflector on this, I don't remember, but what else is in this image that's helping to keep his face from being too shadowed, even though the sun's off to his right? There's something else here that's helping that.
The reflection in the river?
Well, you're half right. It's a reflection, but the river is on the same side as the main light source. It's actually the concrete in front of him. That
Okay.
concrete's acting like a reflector and bouncing light back up into his face. I use concrete a lot. It can be the ground, it can be a wall, but anything that occurs naturally like that, even well, tree's not really a good example of that because it will absorb too much light. But you can use things to either bounce light back onto a subject or subtract light from it. So if there was a black wall, matte black wall right to his left, then the shadow side of his face would go much darker. And sometimes you want that to create mood. So we'll use both light and dark objects to add or subtract light. So the one on the left here, very soft. Now both of these are shot, believe it or not, in direct sunlight. But the one on the left, the girl's standing underneath a gazebo. So the direct light's not hitting her. It's just that soft light that's coming in through the windows. And the girl on the right obviously is strong sunlight coming in. You can tell by the hard shadows it's creating. But we've got her looking towards the sun so that the front part of her face is lit. If she was looking at the camera, her nose would create one heck of a big shadow across her face, and that's not usually a good look. A couple more examples of direct sunlight. You can see the shadows on the violinist's front that obviously he's in direct sunlight. And same thing with the tuba. I think it's a form of a tuba on the right. I'm not sure. They're both in direct sunlight, but they're both facing the light. Now, the guy on the left, the violinist, this is kind of interesting. The lighting pattern that's on his face is actually a very, very famous lighting pattern. There was a famous Renaissance painter who actually has a lighting pattern named after him because this is how he painted. He lit what was called the 5 points of the mask of the face: the forehead, the nose, the two cheeks, and the chin. And the shadow cheek has basically a triangle shaped light on it. And that's what we call Rembrandt lighting. If you look at a lot of Rembrandt's portrait paintings, this is how they're lit. So again, direct sunlight on the left, but with a lot of fill from that concrete. And I may have had a reflector, I'm not sure. This was done a long time ago. And then very soft light, using the sun actually as a background light. So it looks, when you look at her face, it looks like the main light source is coming from the front and off to her left, when in fact, the brightest thing in the image is behind her, it's the sun. But we're using a reflector off to her left to bounce that sunlight back softly into her face. That's what gives the highlights in her eyes. And then we use the sun basically as a kicker light, just to give some edge and some dimension that way. This is an example of some very extreme sunlight. Don't do this very often at all, but sometimes, just for an effect, I'll play with it a little bit. But you have to be very careful where the face looks, where the face points if you're using that kind of light. A little bit more complex, sometimes lighting from behind, not necessarily to create silhouettes, but just to create mood. And it's not, just the lighting, but the composition on the one on the left, using the globes of light above as interesting points. You are going to get blowouts in the veil and floors and things like that if you do this type of thing. But creating that rim and that edge of light around people can sometimes be pretty effective. In this case, just using it as the rim light, letting the ambient light in the room record naturally, and then just giving them a little bit of an outline. This is really just one light from overhead. But again, the direction of where he's looking makes that light work. This is really, really critical. Like if you look at the muscles and the shadows that are created on his chest and abdomen and everything, moving that light forward or backward just a couple of inches makes a huge difference. If I had moved the light further towards the camera, we wouldn't have had all those ripples. If I had moved it back too far, it would have just gone in complete shadow. So you have to get that just right to get those shadows. And then putting his face up towards the light creates a highlight in his eyes, and it keeps that shadow from his nose from coming, straight down across his chin. And sometimes we actually, this is an example of the whole image, almost the whole image being lit from behind with just kicker lights, just to create those edge effects on the bodies and on the clothing and all of that. All right, so as far as lighting is concerned, and it does, I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to go back into Bridge for just a second, because I want to take a look at a couple of other things as far as lighting is concerned. So landscape, the same holds true for outdoor photos and landscapes. You typically don't want to photograph things with very flat lighting. If the sun had been behind me on this shot, it wouldn't have created the tonal gradations in that grass and everything. If you look at the shadows coming off the bases of the trees, you can tell that the sun is actually in the back right corner here. It's out of the frame, but it's creating those shadows forward and creating all the little mini shadows in the grass. In fact, if you look at the lip of the bunker, you can see the shadow created in the sand from that bunker. So that gives you a real indication, a real good indication of where the sun was coming from. So this is, what a compositional element would you say was in play here? Chris, I think you said something, but you're muted.
Diagonal.
That's one. What else?
Perspective.
Yeah, perspective and viewpoint, definitely. This is the use of a very wide angle lens shot from pretty much ground level shooting up. That's what creates the diagonals with the trees. But it all works again because of the lighting that's directional. It's coming across him. It's creating shadows across his clothing, across his face. But there's enough fill light from the ambient light around him to keep that from going very harsh. When you do have really, really harsh shadows, again, typically I'm going to look my subject into that light so that I create dimensionality, but I don't create really bad shadows on the face. Here's another pretty much the same idea in a different location. You still have a shadow from her nose. You still have a very strong shadow on the near side of her face. But it would have been way worse had she been looking at the camera. She would have just been split light. There would have been complete shadow and complete highlight. I always want to look the subject into the sun. In a case like this, our main lights are coming from behind and to the sides because it's those windows. But look at what it does around the edges of her. It creates that rim effect that I'd like to do in a studio. So we're using the windows here as kicker lights, basically, even though they're the brightest things in there. Food is another thing that really requires a lot of directional light. So there's fill from the front. There's dimensionality. There's a little bit of softness because it's a very soft light coming from my right to light that up. A little bit of fill to keep shadows from happening. But the kicker lights from the back is what comes across when you see those highlights on the bacon. You see the highlights on the top of the bun and then through the lettuce and stuff. That's from those lights that are coming from the back corners. So there's probably 4 or 5 lights used on this one. That's actually something I'm working on now. It's nowhere near finished. This is just something I'm playing with, using, trying to mix a black light image with conventional, and just kind of starting. This is going into an area that I'm not going to get into right now because it's a little more complicated, but I thought I might go there, but I'm not going to just yet. So food again, all those highlights that you see across the top, and that's what creates the sizzle. That's what makes the food look appetizing. That's all coming from light that is behind and very low to the subject. So it's just kind of raking across the top of that food. So outside, you got to be careful if you have strong, you don't always have control about when you can shoot these images. When I'm out doing stuff for the magazine, I have a lot of stuff to do in a very short period of time, and I don't have time to go back when the light is great. But at least there was no direct light creating shadows on the front of this building. Had a nice sky, was able to use the trees to frame it a little bit. I think the final image, we cropped out the bottom of that just a touch, you know, where that lighter gravel is or whatever. Not sure what else we did, but you just want to be careful with shadows coming across the building. It is good when you shoot a building from an oblique angle like this, to have it lit from one side, because that again gives you form and dimension. You can tell where the light was off to the left. You can tell the size, shape, and dimension of that building by the fact that the front of it is in more shadow. And then this is just an example of, boy, framing, perspective, convergence. There's a whole lot of stuff going on here in this silhouette. So I just wanted to show you a couple of ideas or a couple things that are not necessarily portrait work, but the lighting plays into it regardless of whether it's people or not. All right, so the last thing I'm going to show you, if I can find, here it is. Our assignment, not for next week, because there won't be an assignment for next week. There will be because we're not having class next week. Next week, you'll get a link, you'll get an announcement that'll have a link in it to watch a YouTube video that probably will expand a little bit on what we talked about today. Or it could be something completely different. It's hard to say. So the assignment won't be for next week. It'll be for 2 weeks from now. I'm going to sort of give it to you now. I'll refine it a little bit on Sakai, but I'll give you a little extra time to work on it rather than just wait until next week to give it to you. Since we've talked about lighting and we've talked about, especially on portraits, we're going to do a self-portrait for the assignment in 2 weeks. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of some very creative self-portraits. Keep in mind that you don't even have to be in a picture for it to be a self-portrait. So let me show you some. This was just a quick search of things that I found online that were pretty cool. So what's at play here? What compositional element? It's the one we just did today.
Framing.
Framing, yeah. So what's interesting though, there's something they did here a little bit unusual and unique. Does anybody see what it is? Look right above his tie, between the tie and the frame. There's no neck. They've actually erased his neck so that you see the background. So it looks like a floating head, when in reality they just erased, you know, his neck to show the background through, or probably cloned the upper part down to the lower part. This is a pretty cool. Some of these are a little more Photoshop reliant. They're really not difficult to do. Some of them don't require any Photoshop at all, but some of them do. This one does. It's really not nearly as difficult to achieve as you might think, but it's kind of a cool. I've seen a lot of images done like this with hands. Some of them have humor. Don't disregard humor, because it can be, you know, pretty effective. And again, this is, even though it's Photoshopped, it's really not that hard to do. Sometimes it's just about you know, an element, an eye, you know, a body part, something like that. This one tells a lot of story with just a very little bit of information. We see her eye, we see the camera. You know, you could make the story in your head that she's got a good eye. You know, she's a photographer, and that's her jam. That's her thing, is that she's got a really good eye for photography. This is another one, not too difficult to do, but kind of an interesting, you know, a shattered type impact. Somebody that wants to portray themselves as a little shattered might do something like this. Oop, missed one. A little bit of a double exposure. Again, very easy to do. You can do this in camera, or you can do it in Photoshop, which is a lot easier because you have more control. Just take 2 images, layer them together, change the opacity, blend them a little bit, maybe mask out a little bit. It's not that hard. Kind of a cool idea. Scrunched up face. He's probably actually does have his nose up against a piece of glass. And then they've, you know, taken this separate image of a jar and just masked his face to the shape of the jar. This one's pretty easy to do, but it's pretty cool. Probably need to shoot this on a tripod. Obviously, it's the same guy, but he has the hood up in one shot and the hood down in the other, and just on opposite sides of the mirror. This is a very simple shot to do, but very effective. Just looking out around a reflective surface. So you almost have a double face, like a two-faced effect. Please don't set anyone's hair on fire when you do this. Abby, I'm talking to you guys. You would be the ones I'd worry about the most. This is definitely Photoshop.
I was gonna light something else on fire.
And that's that. As long as you don't tell anyone I told you to do it, that's fine.
I'm gonna light Alana on fire.
I didn't hear that. So here's another. This is a cool look. It takes some Photoshop, but it's not hard to do at all. It's just masking out parts of his hand to let the underneath image show through, but it's a really interesting effect. This is a very simple way of doing something along those lines. Again, if somebody turned this in, you know what I'd complain about, right? What would I say about this image? Two things that needed to be fixed. Nobody sees two things here? How about one thing?
Sorry, it's not straight and the colors are wonky.
It's not straight. The colors don't bother me quite as much. I mean,
The
I like
outlet.
the
Yeah,
the outlet.
yeah, that outlet, man, it's got to go. I mean, move the girl 2 inches. Come on, that's all it takes, you know. And then you'd have a completely different image. And yeah, a little bit of that crookedness, which if you're going to do it, but don't do it just a little bit. Very simple. Just looking at her image in the viewfinder of a camera with her out of focus. Pretty interesting. This is an easy one to do, but pretty cool if you get it lined up just right. Again, pretty easy to do, you know, falling in pieces, taking pieces out. She's losing a piece of herself, however you want to interpret that. Love this one. What's the compositional element here?
It's framing again, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. And done really well. This is not my image, by the way. This one's kind of cool. Again, a little juxtaposition, a little viewpoint. But again, you don't have to be in the picture for it to be considered a self-portrait. Just look for those odd things and using shadows and light. I've seen this effect done a million times, but it's still pretty effective, all black and white, except for the little swatch across his face that's the size of the brush. Just another way to play with color in black and white. Viewpoint, again, and perspective. How many people have gone to the Eiffel Tower and done a selfie at the Eiffel Tower that looks like every other selfie ever done? This one is pretty cool. If you're going to do a selfie at the Eiffel Tower, make it interesting. Again, a little bit of Photoshop. Doesn't take too much to do this. The intent and the message can be just about anything here. And this one's kind of interesting too, just cutting away half of the face. But if you look and you cover his eye, now you've got a profile view of that face as well. So it's kind of cool the way they did that. So a lot of different looks, a lot of different ideas. Keep some of these things in mind or search for your own so that your portrait, your self-portrait is creative, unique, and if at all possible, maybe says something about you. That's the idea of any portrait, is to say something about the subject. So keep those things in mind. That will be, I'll flesh it out a little bit in the announcement that you'll get. I'll put that out ahead of the link for the video for next week, just so you have a little more time to work on it. But that's where we're going to go in a couple of weeks. So next week, I'm actually supposed to be in Atlanta. That's not going to happen, but I will be stuck in front of my computer for 2 days. So that's why we're not going to have class. Trying to think if there, I know we hit, there were a couple things I skipped over here, but I didn't want to cloud the issue too much. Are there any questions at all about the basics of lighting that we talked about, which are two things, really. Two things, the only thing you have to remember. Size of the light source in relationship to the subject controls the softness of the shadows, and the direction of the light source controls the dimensionality. Those two things are the basic tenets of lighting. If you remember that, you'll be able to do all sorts of things. And I will tell you that typically, the further you move your main light source away from the camera, the more mood and the more creativity your image is going to have. Let me say that again. The further you move your main light source away from your camera, around, think about a circle with the camera being on one point of the circle and the subject being in the middle of the circle. You can move that light all the way around that subject, from the front to the back, to the sides, to the back corners, the front corners. But the further you move it away from your camera, generally the better that image is going to look. So keep those things in mind as you go through and start to create your image. Any questions on any of that, guys? All right, then we're going to wrap up just a few minutes early. Again, you'll be on your own next week. I'm not sure what the subject will be, but I'll probably keep it in line with where we're at, because lighting is very important, and we're going to probably hit it in a couple of different ways, a little bit more than just what we did here. Let me stop sharing that. All right. And we're back. All right, so unless there's anything else, and if there is, if something comes up later, you can always message me, text me, email me, whatever, and I'll get back to you. So for now, it's already getting dark. Oh, I hate this. Wait till the time changes in a month, then we're all going to hate it. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.